Welcome everybody today. I'd like to welcome everyone today. My name is Kathy Hale. I am the Public Services Librarian at the State Library of Pennsylvania. We also have with us Amy Watovich today. She is our newly minted genealogy librarian. So we are going to let her do most of the talking today. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat and we will try and answer them as we are ending the program. You can see Amy's name there. So if you want to try and get a hold of her, you can. Please try and send all emails to that ra-reflive@pa.gov. So you do not need a library card in order to watch the webinar that's going on today. But if you want to take advantage of some of the electronic resources that we have that Amy's going to show you, then you will be able to do that with a library card. After the presentation, it will take us a couple of days, but you will be able to see the slides in the State Library's website under events and then lunch and learn. So don't feel that you have to take furious notes. The slides will be up for you to use. Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Watovich. Like Kathy said, I'm the genealogy and local history librarian at the State Library of Pennsylvania. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some tips about doing genealogy research for your ancestors who lived during the Revolutionary War and may have fought during the Revolutionary War. Revolutionary War records, the military records, usually cover the period 1775 to 1783. After 1783, you're getting into the post-revolutionary era. And because the government was just being created at the beginning of the war, you're going to find that these records are kind of sparse. Not many were created. When they did create records, they really didn't create a lot of details. And you're also going to find that not all of the Revolutionary War records are kept in one place. It really depends on where your ancestor served in the military. That's going to determine where you're going to look for Revolutionary War records about him. Some for the Continental Army are at the National Archives, but there are also a lot of Revolutionary War records at the Pennsylvania State Archives, if they served in a Pennsylvania regiment or if they were, the records themselves were created by the Pennsylvania government. So before you begin your Revolutionary War research, I want to remind you to look at your other research that you've done about your ancestor to try to find details of his life. That's going to help confirm what you may have found in the what you may find in the Revolutionary War records. You can find some of these details on your family group sheet, or if you've created a timeline for your ancestor, there's going to be a lot of details there. If you haven't started to fill out these forms yet, you can get them to download at the National Archives site or Ancestry and Family Search. They have forms available to download for free as well. You want to go back and look through your research and check places where you've already researched, like family interviews, obituaries in newspapers, family and county histories, census records, vital records, sometimes burial records have information about any military service your ancestor may have completed. Also, county histories a lot of times list all of these veterans that were living in the county when they compiled the history. This is an example of an obituary for a Revolutionary War soldier named John Gross. He died in 1846. It was published in the Gettysburg Republican Compiler. It mentions that he served for several years in the military and he served at the Battle of Trenton. It also tells you that he was 93 years old when he died. So this is going to put his approximate date of birth at around 1753. And you can use this date of birth calculation to find out approximately how old he was when he served in the Revolutionary War. And this is another thing that you can use to make sure that you have the right record for the right person, because you're going to find that a lot of people have very similar names. This is another example. It's the history of Berks County, Pennsylvania. In this, it was published by Morton L. Montgomery in 1886. It has an entire chapter in it that's devoted to Berks County, Pennsylvania during the Revolutionary War. It includes a list of all of the militia units from Berks County. It has a list of the Revolutionary War survivors that were living in Berks County in 1823. It even lists the 9 Revolutionary War pensioners that from Berks County that were living there and were listed on the 1840 census as well. And I just wanted to show you these examples to give you an idea of the information that you can find in secondary sources like obituaries and county and family histories. You can use all this information to narrow down the results when you begin to search through the actual military records. You're going to find that there were many people that had the same name or they had very similar names. You're also going to find that maybe your ancestor's name was spelled differently because during this period of time, spelling was very inconsistent. People spelled their name pretty much any way they wanted to when they wrote it down. And you also might find that your ancestor was using a nickname when these records were created.
The other thing you want to think about is, for example, Amy has here from Berks County. In 1772 to 1780s into the early 1800s, Pennsylvania was changing quite a bit as far as its geography went. So for example, Northampton County was not put into existence until 1812. So you might have to look in another county than the one that you think your ancestor lived in.
You may even want to check neighboring state records because the boundaries did change a little bit over time. And just because your ancestor lived in Pennsylvania, he may have signed up in Maryland or Virginia in those areas. Okay. When you start looking for the records, I recommend you go to the National Archives webpage first about the Revolutionary War. They have a page that discusses their primary documents that they have for the Revolutionary War and also what Revolutionary War records they hold. They've digitized their records for the Revolutionary War and they partnered with sites like Family Search, Ancestry, and Fold3. And so people can search them remotely now. You don't have to actually physically go to the National Archives to search through the Revolutionary War records anymore. The second place you should look at is the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission site. They have a webpage that gives an overview of all of their military associations and the Revolutionary War records they hold. Searching for Revolutionary War records in Pennsylvania can be a little complicated because not every soldier who fought was a soldier in the Continental Army. In addition to the Continental Army, there were Pennsylvania Association troops, there was Pennsylvania County militias, there was the Pennsylvania Line troops for the Continental Army, and there was also a Pennsylvania Navy during the Revolutionary War. Pennsylvania Association troops were created because Pennsylvania in the beginning was different from other colonies. We didn't have a strong military organization. We were created by religious groups that were pacifists. So there was no strongly organized military from the very beginning of Pennsylvania. So as war became more realistic, local volunteer military associations were formed. Sometimes they're called the Associators. Their purpose was to repel invasions. And participation in these associations was voluntary. The associations were organized geographically, usually by county. So usually the men who served in these associations, they were all from the same town or township in a county. The military associations lasted until 1777 when they were disbanded and the state formed the Pennsylvania militias. Enrollment in the militia was different because it was compulsory. Men between ages of 18 and 53 had to enroll in the militia. But like the associations before them, they were created for the purpose of repelling an invasion of Pennsylvania. The militias were also organized on a geographic basis. They were organized by county and there were different militia units in that county. In addition to the militia, there was Pennsylvania Line troops. There were 13 regiments in the Pennsylvania Line, as well as they had some independent companies and battalions that were formed. Enlistment in the Pennsylvania Line was voluntary. Men usually enlisted in the Pennsylvania Line for at least 6 months. Sometimes they enlisted for the duration of the war. And in addition to the Pennsylvania Line, there was the Pennsylvania Navy. The Pennsylvania Navy was also created in 1775, like the Pennsylvania Line. Enlistment in the Navy was voluntary. Its main objective was to defend Philadelphia and also to protect the Delaware River so trade could continue during the war. Because there's so many different military organizations that existed for your ancestor to serve in, his records might be housed at Pennsylvania State Archives, but in some cases, the National Archives may have some records for him as well. And like I said, the National Archives digitized its Revolutionary War records, and you can search for them on Ancestry or Fold3 or Family Search. The Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission has this page that discusses all the military organizations for Pennsylvania that existed during the Revolutionary War. They also have a page that links to a list of all of the different militias, the county militias. They have it separated by county that served during the war as well. When you start searching for your ancestors' records, you're probably going to first start searching on an electronic database online, like everybody's been doing for the past year. The state library subscribes to 3 different electronic genealogy databases, and state employees can search these from home right now with their library card. The biggest one that everybody is interested in is Ancestry.com. Ancestry is letting state employees search at the Ancestry Library Edition that we subscribe to. They're letting our state employees search that remotely from home until December 31st right now. I don't know if it'll get extended after that. That's up to Ancestry. If it does, we'll announce that. When you search Ancestry, instead of just putting your ancestor's name in the main search screen and getting a million records that aren't related to what you're looking for, you can go directly to the military records by using their card catalog feature. If you go to the black bar at the top of the screen, I have a small picture of it down here where it says search. If you click on that, you can select military records, and this will bring up this larger screen over here on the right that has you can search only the military record databases that Ancestry has to offer then. You can also use the card catalog feature at the bottom of that search screen as well. That will take you to a list of every database that Ancestry offers that has all different kinds of records. And you can use the choices on the left side of the screen to narrow your search down to Revolutionary War if you want. A third way to do it is if you choose the card catalog feature, they have a keyword search box at the top of the page, and you can type in Revolutionary War, and that will bring up all of the Revolutionary War databases that include records for the Revolutionary War period. If you do choose to do that, make sure you use quotes around the word Revolutionary War, because otherwise you're going to turn up every database description that has the word either revolutionary or the word war in it, and you'll get a lot of extra results that'll kind of bog down your search. We also have Fold3. Fold3 is basically military records. It pretty much all has only military records on it. On their main search screen, they have an icon for the US Revolutionary War that will bring up, you can click on that and go to this page here, and that brings up their US Revolutionary War collection on it. And you can search only the US Revolutionary War collection. In addition to the Revolutionary War documents, the Fold3 also has the published Pennsylvania archives. The published Pennsylvania archives are different than the Pennsylvania State Archives. The published Pennsylvania archives are accounts and records of the Pennsylvania government during the Revolutionary and colonial eras. So they have things in there like lists for militias and pensions that were issued during the Revolutionary War. There are also accounts for people who conducted business with the military during the Revolutionary War as well. For example, if they sold them supplies. You can also search the Fold3 the Pennsylvania archives directly on Fold3 for your ancestor instead of just getting all of those extra search results. You just have to go to the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission's documents that they posted on Fold3, and you can search only the Pennsylvania archives then. We also have a third database that we subscribe to. It's called Heritage Quest. It has a database of Revolutionary War pension and land grant records on it. It also has county and family histories on it as well. So you may be able to find information about your ancestor during the Revolutionary War there. All 3 of these databases, like I said, are searchable from our state library's electronic resources guide on our website. You have to go through the resources guide to get to them though, because otherwise it will take you to the regular databases that you subscribe to. The most basic military information about your ancestor, like what unit he was in and where he served, is probably going to be notated on muster rolls or in compiled military service records. Compiled military service records are also called CMSRs. Beginning in the 1890s, the War Department started creating these compiled military service records to track and help document the service of volunteer soldiers. They started with the Civil War veterans, but they now have CMSRs for veterans through the Revolutionary War, through the Philippine insurrection in 1899. These records were transcribed from all different kinds of military records that the War Department kept. So they transcribed things like muster rolls, payrolls, hospital rolls, inspection reports, all for each soldier, and then they kept them all in one place. They did this so they could check records to verify service claims for pensions and other benefits. If the records were all transcribed in one place, they could check them more quickly and process pension applications more efficiently. So each CMSR should contain basic information about a soldier's military career. They typically include information about a soldier's service, like his name, his enlistment date, the length that he was in service, any pay records, and they may also include any reports of injuries that he incurred in battle. What CMSRs don't typically include are next of kins or family members. So they're really not useful for tracing other members of the family, but they can give you information about the time your ancestor spent in the military. The CMSRs are at the National Archives, but they've digitized all the ones for the Revolutionary War, and you can access them on Ancestry.com. They usually have an outer envelope with the soldier's name and his regiment on it. Inside the envelope, there are cards with information about each of the records that your ancestor is included in. The records are transcribed onto the cards that are then put in the envelope, and each of those records cards is numbered, and the numbers that are on the outside of the jacket, the envelope jacket, those correspond to the cards inside. At the right, I have just an example of the CMSR for Lieutenant Joseph Collier. It's only part of it. He fought in the Pennsylvania Regiment, the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment during the Revolutionary War. His CMSR wasn't extremely long, but it did include several pay reports and inspection reports for him. You can use the information that's on these cards to track any pay certificates that are issued. If you can see the first card on the left here, it was for the Pierce's certificate that was issued to him. It tells it tells the amount of the certificate that he could redeem it for. And it also gives the certificate number if you want to try to take that number and track down his original pay certificate. Some of the CMSRs for soldiers are very long because they were compilations of so many different records. If the soldier was in service for several years, there's obviously going to be more records that were created that pertain to him, so his CMSR will be longer. The CMSRs for the Revolutionary War soldiers, they tend to be a little shorter because there weren't as many records being created by the government then, and the records weren't as detailed as the ones that were kept in later years. So the records on the CMSR are for volunteer soldiers at the National Archives. They're from records that the War Department kept. The Pennsylvania State Archives has something similar. It's called the Revolutionary War Military Abstracts Card File. It's housed at the State Archives. These are records or abstracts of records that concern the Pennsylvania Militia, the Pennsylvania Line, and the Pennsylvania Navy. The card's going to have some basic information on it about whether the soldier, it'll have his name, his rank, whether he was on active or inactive duty, his county of residence, what battalion he was serving in, and it has notations of any pay or depreciation certificates that were issued to him. It also might list if he had any fines that were delinquent as well. In the Pennsylvania Militia, participation in the militia was compulsory, but there were some ways to get around it. One of the ways was you could send a substitute. But if you didn't send a substitute or you didn't report to duty, there were fines that were levied against people for not reporting to duty in the militia. So they might be notated on these cards as well. This is an abstract card for Nathaniel Bailey. He was from Chester County. He was in the 8th Company of the 8th Regiment. It doesn't really give a lot of information for him. It does indicate that he was on inactive duty during this time period. And it also tells you on these cards where they found this information. His record came from the military militia accounts at the records of the Comptroller General. Some of these cards have been digitized and you can search them at the PA Photos and Documents collection at the Power Library website. There is also an online index for these card files at the State Archives website as well. If you go to the Power Library website to search for these, for any Revolutionary War records, there is not a separate collection for Revolutionary War records on the, that have been digitized. So you would have to go to the state archives and search the state archives collection that's on the PA Photos and Documents collection. The digital documents that the state archives has digitized are not organized by subject. The archives organizes things by the agency that kept the records. So, and each agency will have its own records group number. So to find Revolutionary War records there, you're going to have to go through each agency that might have issued the record or kept the record to begin with and look for the Revolutionary War records that way. Another place you can look for muster rolls and militia list is the Pennsylvania Archives. I mentioned them earlier. The published Pennsylvania Archives are volumes that documented the business of Pennsylvania's government. You can find all sorts of information about Pennsylvania's government during the colonial and revolutionary eras. Most of the war records are going to be in the 3rd and 5th series. Sometimes they're in the 6th. The Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission has digitized all of the series and volumes of the Pennsylvania Archives, and they're available on Ancestry and Fold 3, and you can search them directly by using the card catalog. These are a couple of examples of militia lists in the Pennsylvania Archives. This one on the left here is for the Pennsylvania Navy. It's a muster roll. It is the muster roll of the ship the Bulldog that was commanded by Samuel Potts. Its muster roll is for the period of December 1st, 1776 to January 1st, 1777. The other one is an example of a militia list from the Cumberland County Militia that from October 23rd, 1777. There is another place you can try to find muster rolls for the Continental Army at least. And this is the Valley Forge Muster Roll Project. It documents the Continental Army troops that were at winter quarters at Valley Forge from December 19th, 1777 to June 19th, 1778. In addition to individual entries for each soldier, they have lists of all the regiments that were at Valley Forge, and they also have information about the Valley Forge encampment in general. This is an example of the entry for First Lieutenant Francis Adams, that he was a commissioned soldier from Pennsylvania. He served in the 10th Pennsylvania Regiment and the 2nd Division and the 1st Pennsylvania Waynes Brigade. In addition to just listing the names of the regiment that he served in, it does give you sometimes have notes about his their service there. For example, he has a note saying that he was charged with ungentlemanlike behavior in propagating a report that an officer of the 10th Pennsylvania Regiment had behaved cowardly at the action of Germantown. And when Colonel Hubley asked him to name the officer, he refused to do so in an unbecoming manner. And it also tells you the date that he was cashiered out, which was in May 1778. So these records will give you a lot of information, not just about what unit they served in, but they can also have some information about what it was like what their life was like in service, what they actually went through sometimes. The one thing that they don't have, and like I mentioned before, is names of relatives, names or addresses where people lived. In addition to muster rolls, service records will mention pay certificates and depreciation certificates, sometimes land warrants. Depreciation certificates were issued because the military was having trouble paying soldiers for their service. The new government didn't have a lot of money. Its currency wasn't worth as much. So depreciation certificates were issued to encourage the soldiers to stay in service. They could sometimes turn these certificates in and purchase land, and they were also negotiable. They could sell them to somebody else if they needed the money. You can find a list of depreciation certificates issued in Pennsylvania in the Pennsylvania Archives on Fold 3 and Ancestry. The state archives has also digitized a lot of them and put them in the PA Photos and Documents collection on the Power Library website. The certificates usually listed the soldier's name, his rank, the military unit he was in, the amount of interest that he earned. The records are usually organized by the unit that the soldier served in and then alphabetically by soldier. So in order to find your ancestor certificate, you're going to have to know what unit he served in first. Like I said, the certificates were transferable. So if the soldier wanted to, he could sign them over to somebody else to redeem. The white page at the back here is the depreciation certificates that were issued in Pennsylvania, and this page is from the Pennsylvania Archives. It lists that there was a Lieutenant Joseph Collier listed. He was issued a depreciation certificate. And on the Power Library site, I was able to find a certificate for Lieutenant Joseph Collier for £8 2 for payment of 1 year's interest on his depreciation certificate. One thing you want to do when you find the depreciation certificate for your ancestor is you want to make sure you look at the back of the certificate or the image of the back of the certificate. Those certificates had to be endorsed when they were cashed in, so you may be able to find your ancestor certificate on the back, on the reverse side of it. There were also certificates called the Pierce's certificates or Pierce's registers. These were named after the paymaster who issued them. His name was John Pierce. They were issued to settle accounts at the end of the war. They weren't always for pay. Sometimes they were issued, they made payments to people who sold supplies to the Army, or the Army had to reimburse them for using their property or things like that. The State Archives has indexes and payroll books for Pierce's certificates that were issued to the Pennsylvania line. They've digitized them. They're also on the PA Photos and Documents collection at the Power Library website. They're under the records for the Office of the Comptroller General. This is an example of a certificate that was issued to Robert Finley for, it was approximately $73. There's also pages from the payroll books that list all the certificates that they issued in them as well at this site. Like depreciation certificates, you're going to want to check the backs if possible to see if your ancestor's signature is there. Or there may be other information noted there as well if he signed it over to someone else. So far, the records we've discussed haven't really had a lot of genealogy information in them. They've mainly included military information. You might be able to find more typical genealogical information in pension records. Pension records can include statements about the soldier's military service. Sometimes they have reports of injuries in them. They can also include a lot of information about the soldier's wife and children. There were a lot of different pension laws enacted over the year. The first pension law was in 1776. It provided half pay for officers and men in service who were disabled and they were unable to earn a living. They widened it in 1778 to provide half pay for 7 years at the conclusion of the war to all officers who remained in service to the end of the war. And then in 1780, they added widows and orphans to that. They had a few more changes to it. State troops and militia were finally included in 1806. In 1818, pensions for life were authorized based on the period of service in Continental Army for Continental Army soldiers. Then the government discovered how expensive pensions were. So in 1820, they changed the law again, and they required a certain income levels, and they required inventories of estates to be submitted to prove that pensioners really actually needed the pension. So if you found your ancestor in an 1818 pension document, but you couldn't find him after 1820, it may have been because he was removed from the rolls, because a lot of people were removed from the rolls because of this. In 1832, the Pension Act was changed again to allow pay for life based on the years of service in the military, and widows and children were also entitled to receive payments. There were a lot more changes. The final one was in 1878. They authorized pensions for life to the widows of veterans who, even if they had only served 14 days. Before that, typically a veteran had to serve at least 6 months to qualify for a pension. There were several different pension lists compiled so the government could keep track of the costs of these pensions. There were pension lists for 1813, 1818, 1820, and 1834. The State Library has these pension lists in our collection. You can also find them digitized at places like HathiTrust and the Internet Archive. This is an example from the 1834 pension roll. It was digitized and you can find it at HathiTrust. The pages on this page is from Adams County. It gives the name, the rank of the soldier, his pension amount. Sometimes it lists where the person served and the date that the pension was issued. And I don't know if you can see Robert Allison there at the top of the list. He was awarded a pension in 1818, but then the note says that he was dropped from the rolls in 1820 when the pension laws changed. So that's an example of somebody who did get a pension and then the government removed him from the rolls. Soldiers did not Soldiers didn't automatically get pensions. There were several different pension laws that were enacted over the years that changed who qualified for a pension. None of them automatically granted a soldier or a widow a pension. For the soldier and or family members like the widows or children to receive a pension, someone had to apply to the government and prove that they were entitled to it. They had to submit documentation to the government that proved that they were who they said they were. And they also had to prove the veteran service. And this documentation that they submitted was placed usually in a single file under the applicant's name. You can find the pensions records at state archives. They have they have a Revolutionary Wars Pensioners Index online. It's alphabetical. It lists the pensioner's name, the years the pension started and ended, and it tells you where you can find the pension record. This is just an example of what the pension record index entry looks like for Samuel Austin. It shows 2 entries for someone named Samuel Austin. The start and end dates are from 1836 to 1843 and 1839 to 1844. And it also tells you where to find the records. They're in records group 2, and it gives you the volume and the page number of the pension roll. When you find this, you'll have to contact the state archive to find out where the actual records are kept. They have digitized a lot of files, and on the Power Library website, you can find the Revolutionary War pension books and the Revolutionary War pension files there as well. So if they've been digitized, that's where they would be. You can also find digitized pension files at Ancestry, Fold3, and Heritage Quest. State employees can access all of these remotely again through our electronic resources guide. When people applied for a pension, all the documentation, like I said, was kept in a single file for each applicant, and then each file was numbered, and there's a letter in front of the number. The letter is going to either be an S, a W, or an R. An S is a file for a survivor's pension. That would be an application that was made by the veteran himself. Widow is for an application by a W is an application that was made by a widow. And if the number has an R in front of it, that means that that pension was rejected. So that would be they would still have the documentation, but the person would have never actually received the pension. These files can be extremely long. They can contain a lot of information from a lot of different sources. These pension files are where you're going to probably find the most typical genealogical information about your ancestor who was a soldier. This is just part of a pension application for Martha Collier. She was the widow of James Collier. Her application was 72 pages long. You can see in the top right corner of the application number, it's behind my one screen, so I'm not sure if everybody else can see it or not, but besides James Collier's name, there's a number and there's a letter W in front of it that denotes it's the widow's application. It includes several handwritten letters that describe James's military service, and it verifies that Martha was his wife. Also, one of the things that I pulled out of it, they included a handwritten letter from their minister verifying that James Collier and Martha Rutherford were legally married on April 24th in 1787. So there's an example there of the genealogy information you can find. It not only gives the dates of the marriage, it also includes Martha's maiden name. This pension file also included a letter in it from the 1920s. It was written by the War Department to a relative of a William Collier. William was a Civil War veteran, and he was James's son. And the veteran wrote to the relative wrote to the War Department to find out more information from James's pension file for William. So the War Department's response pretty much summarizes James's life. It gives his birth date, where he was born. It describes his military service, gives his date and location of his death in Ohio. It also lists his marriage to Martha and when they were married. It gives the date of her death and where she died, and it lists the names of all of his children. So this is just an example of what you might be able to find in a pension file. Every application is going to be different. The information you're going to find in it is going to depend on the length of his service, and also how much documentation that the applicant sent in to prove that they were entitled to the pension. Another place you can look for pension information is on the United States Census. In 1840, the census was still only recording heads of households and making check marks for the number of people in certain age categories in the household, but they did include a special schedule to record the number of pensioners for the Revolutionary or military service. So if your ancestor was alive in 1840 and you can see if you can locate him on that census, you want to go to the second page of the census record and see if he's listed in the Revolutionary War pensioners column. They list his name and his age. It might be tricky because at that point in time, he might have been living with someone else. He wouldn't have been the head of the household. So he wouldn't have been listed by name on the main census. This is the census record for Samuel Austin Jr. On the second page, it lists Samuel Austin Sr. as a Revolutionary War pensioner that is living with him, and it states that his age is 84. If you can't find it on the big census, the original census records, you can go to the Census Bureau's website. They have a special schedule on their website called the Census of Pensioners for Revolutionary or Military Service. It's separated by state, so you can go directly to Pennsylvania. The state is divided in eastern and western districts, and the counties in each district are listed alphabetically. And each county will list all of the Revolutionary War pensioners from the main census on this schedule. This is the page that was listed for Samuel Austin Sr. It lists him as living in Toby in Armstrong County. His age is 84 and he's living with Samuel Austin Jr. This verifies actually what was listed on Samuel Austin Jr.'s census record, 1840 census record as well. In addition to pensions, unclaimed federal land was given to Revolutionary War veterans as an incentive for remaining in service. Bounty land warrants were usually issued by the federal government to the soldiers in the Continental Army and the Pennsylvania line. How much land you were entitled to depended on your rank. Like with pensions, Revolutionary War veterans had to submit claims and support it with documentation and warrants to prove their service. There were no bounty lands allotted in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is considered a state land state. Land in Pennsylvania was already allotted by the time of the Revolution, and there were no public demand lands available that the federal government could award to soldiers. So if your ancestor took advantage of his bounty land warrant to claim land, his land claim probably would be located in one of the western states. Most likely it would be in Ohio. You can find these files and applications on Ancestry, Fold3, and Heritage Quest. Most of the time, the bounty land records are included with the pension file databases online. This is an example of the bounty land warrant file that I found in Fold3 for Lieutenant Joseph Collier of Berks County. There's no evidence that he ever submitted a claim for lands, but his file does show that there was a warrant issued to him, and it even gives the warrant number and states that it was for 200 acres. It also has in it a letter from one of his descendants who was inquiring about his land warrant, and that gives some details about his military service as well. One other note about bounty land warrants is the government was issuing bounty land warrants until 1855. So if your ancestor was issued for one, you may want to double check to make sure that it was for his Revolutionary War service and not for another reason. Also, this file is with the pension files online, but it's only 4 pages long. The pension file that I mentioned to you earlier, that was over 70. So that can give you an example of the differing amounts of information that you're going to find in all of these records. In addition to the federal bounty land warrants that were issued, some states offered land award incentives to their state troops. In Pennsylvania, these were called donation or depreciation lands. The donation lands were located, they were sort of north of Pittsburgh in the northwestern part of the state. Members of the Pennsylvania Line, the Pennsylvania Navy, and prisoners of war were eligible for depreciation land certificates. The Pennsylvania State Archives has donation land registers online that lists the veterans that were entitled to donation lands in Pennsylvania. This index is organized alphabetically by the veteran's name. They've also digitized some of the donation land records on the Power Library website. And they also have a page that's devoted to land records in general in Pennsylvania. That also lists gives you some more information about donation and depreciation lands in Pennsylvania as well. In Pennsylvania, not everybody was on the side of the colonists. There were loyalists in Pennsylvania as well. Some people remained loyal to England and the king. Some people tried to remain neutral, or sometimes people were members of religious groups that were pacifists. Many times when people remain loyal to England and the crown, they were forced to forfeit their property and left the colony, or they were exiled by the government. Even pacifists were sometimes caught having loyalist tendencies, and then they were forced to forfeit their property and were exiled. Many times if they left Pennsylvania, they went places like Canada, Florida, or the West Indies. So if your ancestor disappeared from the Pennsylvania records during the Revolutionary War, and you think he might have been a loyalist, you could try looking for records in those places to see if you can trace him there. The Pennsylvania State Archives has information about loyalist claims, and they have some files about estates that were forfeited by the loyalists in their records. There's also a list online called the Pennsylvania Blacklist. There's one list that was originally published in the Ontario Historical Society, but there's an online copy of it as well. It lists people who were convicted of high treason in Pennsylvania, and they had to forfeit their property. There's also a digital copy of the Blacklist online at the Hathi Trust site. Another place you can go to look for information about loyalists is the Online Institute for Advanced Loyalist Studies. It has information about loyalists that lived in Pennsylvania during the Revolution, and it also has a list of loyalist regiments that served in Pennsylvania during the Revolutionary War. If you're interested in learning more about the battles that your ancestors fought in, there are a few places you can go to see maps of the colonies and the battlefields of the Revolution. The Library of Congress has a webpage that's dedicated to the maps and charts of North America and the West Indies during the Revolutionary era. This map is from their digital maps collection. It was not actually drawn during the Revolutionary War. It was created in 1928, but it depicts the Valley Forge encampment from December 1777 to June 1778. Another place you can look, there is a Revolutionary War animated map that's on the American Battlefield Trust site, and you may be able to find more information there about any battles that your ancestor may have fought in. A few other places you can look for information about a Revolutionary War ancestor. There's a society called the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's a lineage society. They have a very large library. They've been publishing documents about the Revolutionary War and the soldiers who fought in it for years. Some of their records have been digitized, and they've put them on their website. You can just access them by using their library that's online. On their website, they also have an ancestor search database. This in the back is the record that they have for Joseph Collier from Berks County, Pennsylvania. It lists his date of birth, where he was born, when he took his oath of allegiance. It also lists his spouse's name as well as some other information. The DAR also publishes lineage books. These document the lineage of Revolutionary War soldiers. These lineage books are also available on Ancestry, so you can search them on the Ancestry database. You don't have to go physically to a library. They also have something called a Patriot Index that lists the names of men and women who provided Revolutionary War service. The Patriot Index is also available on Family Search as well. In addition to the Daughters of the American Revolution, there's also an organization called the Sons of the American Revolution. It's a lineage society similar to the DAR, and they also have a library that you can use for genealogical research, but they haven't digitized as much, and you'd have to contact them directly. They do have all of their application files that people use to apply for membership in the Sons of the American Revolution. They've digitized those. Those are available on Ancestry.com. So you may be able to search their applications and find the lineage of your Revolutionary War ancestor. It was used to document somebody else's membership in this society, and you can find more genealogy information about him there. The Papers of the War Department was there for 1784 to 1800. Those are the years it covers. The War Department was created in 1790, and then it unfortunately burned in 1800. When it burned, all of the records that it was holding were destroyed, including the pension applications. So if you're trying to locate an ancestor's pension application and he applied before 1800, you're probably not going to be able to find it, but they have found some of the War Department papers in private collections, and they've been gathering them together and trying to digitize them. So you might want to go there. You may not be able to find your ancestor, but you might be able to find information about the unit that he served in or something like that. Another place you can check is the United States Serial Set. The United States Serial Set documents the reports and papers of Congress. The first 14 Congresses are actually in something called the American State Papers, but there's usually a link with them on the Serial Set site. The Serial Set itself starts with the 15th Congress in 1817. There are links in it. There are links to it at the Library of Congress's website, and it will contain information like private claims for military service. They will have land grant records in there. They have military registers similar to the one that's on the side here for listing all of the officers who served in the Continental Army. The DAR also submitted reports to Congress, and many times those included grave registers of Revolutionary War soldiers as well. So that's just another place that you can, you might want to check for information about your ancestor. This was just an overview of all the types of Revolutionary War records that are out there and that may exist for your ancestor. It's really just sort of scratching the surface of what's out there and where to find them. The State Library, we're going to have an online resources guide also that is devoted to Revolutionary War genealogy resources. It will soon be on our website. I'm hoping it will be on. We can link to it when we link the copies of the PowerPoint and the presentation on our Lunch and Learn page as well. If you need help with any Revolutionary War research or any other genealogy research, you can always contact us at the email addresses here, and we'll try to help you out. That was all I had to cover today. Kathy, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Amy, I think you've pretty much covered most of the things that we had talked about. The other thing for the serial set, if you have trouble getting it through the Library of Congress, as a state employee, you also have access to that through the electronic resources of the State Library of Pennsylvania. You can also just email us and we will try and answer your questions. Someone had a question about their ancestor served at Valley Forge, but they were from Massachusetts. The Valley Forge site that Amy showed you might be a good place to go to get that kind of information. But if they were from Massachusetts, you might try the Massachusetts State Library. Each state has a state library. Some of them do more genealogy than others, but Massachusetts is very good about helping with genealogical information. We also have some of the magazines from the DAR at the state library that you would be able to ask us to help you to look for that as well. I think that's all the questions that we had. Just looking through here. Amy, one of the questions was if there's suggestions for using Fold 3. The person feels like they're blundering through it. And was there any advice that you could give them for getting better results from Fold 3?
Well, one thing I would do, if you know which war your ancestors served in, I would use, I believe it's on the left side, you can select which war records that you want to search. You can select Revolutionary War, World War I, Civil War, things like that. That's probably the first thing I would do, because then you're going to eliminate a lot of the extra records. Like if there was someone who served in World War II with the same name as your ancestor who served in the Civil War, if you just use the main search screen, you're going to get records for both of them. If you can eliminate the World War II, then you can narrow your focus on the Civil War records that you were interested in. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I was explaining it.
You want to be careful of too, and we mentioned this in some of the other genealogy webinars that we've done, is that there are many people who use the same name over and over again. If you were Irish, it might be John or Patrick. If you were from a German background, it would be different names that are just used over and over again. So you have to make sure that you are looking at the right person in the right place. And again, remember that Pennsylvania was growing very much at that time. So if your ancestor came from Western Pennsylvania of some sort, there may not have been an Allegheny County or a Forest County. And we can help you to identify that. If you go to some of the other lunch and learns, Amy has addressed how Pennsylvania has changed over the years, or you can email the state library and we can help you to discover what county it would have been in at the time of the revolution. Records, just like any other genealogy, it's only as good as the records that were made at the time. Things have burned up, they've gotten lost, they're in somebody's attic. So the further back you go, sometimes the harder it is to do. Remember, spelling was not homogenized until the mid 1800s. So that think of all the variant spellings that might be your particular ancestor. We did have another question whether a retired employee can get a state library card. Anyone who is a resident of Pennsylvania can get a state library card. Currently, the state library is physically closed, so you cannot come to visit us. Pretty soon, maybe sometime later this summer, we will be opened by appointment only so that you may come in and do some research with us. So the answer is any Pennsylvanian over the age of 18 can get a library card, but you have to be an active state employee in order to access these electronic resources remotely. But that's where the staff of the state library can help you. If you're looking for something specific, we can do some searching for you. I don't want to let you think that we have all of the answers. We may send you to, we do have a researchers list that these are paid genealogists that help people to look up their ancestors. We do not recommend one over another, but we will give you the list and you can work out with them to do some research for you as well.
Oh, Kathy, also the Power Library website, the www.powerlibrary.org, anybody in Pennsylvania can use that.
That's correct.
You
have to have a library card from a Pennsylvania library, or you can use your state library card, or you can make up an electronic card for use in the Power Library. Why must you be an active employee in order to access the online resources? We have to pay for these resources according to the number of people that can access this particular electronic resource. And unfortunately, we don't have the resources in order to let everyone on who are not active employees. So we have to come to a specific number of who can get on and who can't. We do include those employees for the Commonwealth who are contractors. They can also apply for a library card. We consider them employees of the Commonwealth for the length of their contract. Okay. I think that's all that I have. We have about 5 minutes left if there are some other questions. I don't see any others in the chat. So Amy, thank you so much for spending all this time and getting all this information for us. There is a wealth of information here for people to get. Usually after a week or so, you can go to the state library's website, look under events, look for the lunch and learns, and the recording for this will be at that particular space on the state library. If you can't remember all that, just email us at that rareflib@pa.gov. And so we want to thank everyone who participated today. We want to say thank you to your ancestors who served in the Revolutionary War, or maybe they were a loyalist that served for the other side. So we are dedicated to helping people to find information about their ancestors and the people of Pennsylvania. So Amy, do you have any parting words for everybody?
Just thank you for listening. I hope I was able to help you somewhat.
Okay, so thanks everybody for coming today. Keep cool, keep out of the heat. Try and have a good day for the rest of the day. Again, if you have any questions, you have the phone number and the email that you can get a hold of us. So thanks very much for joining us today.